When he emerged, church bells were ringing all over Texas. The phone in his home was ringing too. The first call to his home was from a radio station in New York. And every time he finished an interview and he put the receiver back in the cradle, it rang again. That night he developed a migraine. His wife, she pulled the telephone from the plug so that he could sleep. When he woke up the next morning, he plugged the phone back in and it began to ring immediately. Welcome to Extraordinary Stories podcast. Everyone has a story to tell. We all have a tale. And I'm fascinated by yours. I don't even know it yet, but I know I'm fascinated by it. I like people. I like behaviour. I like choice. I like chance. But most of all, I love a real story. Hey, how are you? Are you well? Are you good? I am. So this is going to be a little bit of a shorter episode, and I'll tell you where it comes from. It comes from the little thing that I did at the end of the last episode, in which I said I was just going to talk about extraordinary people. Whoa. Oh, fucking wow, did you get in touch with me about extraordinary people? Oh my God, I got so many emails. I got so many messages. I was really overwhelmed. I just could not believe the amount of people sending me stories and there's millions of them. How I'll ever get through them, I don't know, but please keep sending them. So I just thought, you know what, I've got some really brilliant stuff coming in here. So actually what I'll do is I'll just do a little short episode where I actually just tell some stories of really extraordinary people. Really, the response was amazing. So before we get to it, can I just do a quick couple of shout outs? I want to say hello to Nicole McCartney. Hello Nicole, you got in touch this week. Lovely to hear from you. So yeah, great. Hi. Suzanne Decker. Lovely words on Facebook. You just really made me smile. So that was lovely. And Alison Shields. Hey, you are just a brilliant member of the Extraordinary Stories podcast group. You make me laugh with everything that you put up there. And so hi, Alison. I'm just going to do one podcast recommendation, and that is the podcast Pleasing Terrors. If you haven't heard it, I think you would like it. Go and give it a go. Go and give Mike Brown a go over at Pleasing Terrors. It's a really satisfying podcast. Okay, this episode 2, quite short stories for you. Okay, let's go. Let's talk about Robert O'Donnell. Some say he was a hero. Some say he just couldn't cope with what he had done. Some say he just couldn't handle the limelight. On the 23rd of April, 1995, Robert O'Donnell shot himself through the head with a shotgun on a deserted road in the middle of Texas. 8 years earlier, Robert had saved a little girl's life as the whole world watched. And for a while, he was the centre of not only his own small universe, but the whole universe. Robert was part of the explosion of rolling news. 24-hour coverage. The things that we know now. The thing that we know so well now. But when this happened to Robert, that wasn't really a thing. Rolling news, 24-hour, Sky News channels, news after news after news, wasn't really a thing. This was very, very new. So, it's 1986 and it's Texas. 18-month-old Jessica McClure, she's at her aunt's house and her mum is there with her. In her aunt's back garden there is a well. It's a deep, deep well. Now, Jessica's mother, she sits her on the edge for just a second as she goes to do something else, and Jessica falls into the well. She falls right to the bottom. She's fallen 7 meters right down. The well is incredibly, incredibly narrow. It's only 20 centimetres, which if you think about it, 20 centimetres, I mean, that's not a big space. 20 centimetres wide. That's all it is. So it's 20 centimetres wide, 7 metres deep. So from this moment on, there is a 58-hour continued rescue attempt. Police, fire brigade, paramedics, neighbours, friends, strangers, everybody, anybody, they're all scrambling to try and save baby Jessica's life. News reporters, they caught the story very quickly and it became a sensational news story. Cameras, photographers, journalists, they surrounded the well as the rescue attempt took place. This just became absolutely huge. At one point, there were 350 people standing around that well. 350 people. And police, they actually had to put up barriers to stop the growing crowds who were trying to get near the well. So the news station CNN, they dedicated their entire news slot to the story. They focused on it entirely, and that wasn't really done at this time. That's the point I was making there about rolling news, is that you would get a news story at, on the 10 o'clock news, the 6 o'clock news, whatever it was. But CNN actually dedicated their entire news to the story of the baby who'd fallen down the well. So neighbours at this point and people who lived nearby, they're making coffee, they're making sandwiches, they're handing out drinks, because hundreds of people at this point were being drawn towards where this story was happening. Some people were at points, they were letting strangers sleep on their couch. They were inviting people into their homes, letting them use their shower, letting them use their phone, just so that these people could be around where this was happening, because it was so huge. People who were arriving maybe the day after it had happened, they had no chance of getting anywhere near the well. They had no chance of even getting in the back door. There were so many people around. Reporters were at this point trying to get an interview with Jessica's parents, but the parents were just refusing. They're obviously freaking the fuck out at this point. My God, that 18-month-old baby is in a well. Of course they're freaking out. Of course they don't want to be talking to reporters, but reporters are doing whatever they can to try and get an interview. So Robert O'Donnell was at work when he first heard the news of baby Jessica who'd fallen down the well. Robert was a firefighter. Now, he had no reason to think that this event would have anything to do with him. But, he was wrong. Now, he was one of about 50 firefighters in the area with paramedic training. But for Robert, it was a job. It wasn't necessarily his biggest vocation in life. It wasn't necessarily his passion. It was a job. He enjoyed it, but he left at the end of the day, not really thinking much about what had actually gone on that day. He was happy to just come in, do his shift, and go. Robert was married to his high school sweetheart, and they had 2 young kids. He was and I really hate this. I've read this 3 times. 3 different articles said this about Robert, and I really dislike it. They said there was nothing to really notice about him. The world would never really have noticed Robert O'Donnell. What a shit way to be described. What horrible. The world should be noticing everybody. We should all be noticing each other. Never mind. The world wouldn't notice. I mean, I understand what it's saying, But, yeah, I just think it's a very nice way to describe somebody. So back at the well, all sorts of efforts are being made to determine, well, first of all, is baby Jessica alive? Is there a chance that she can be saved? So Robert is a few miles away, and he feels the impulse, he feels the urge. He thinks, I can help in this situation. I can do something here. So he drives over to where the incident has happened, and he has to try and fight through all of the media, all of the people that are there, the crowds. He has to fight through them all. By the time he gets there, some developments have happened. So what they've done is they've put a hose down the well that's feeding down oxygen, and a local news station has lowered a microphone down, and they've sort of set up a sound system in the back garden in the hope of being able to hear Jessica down in the well. So, side note here, but another guy in the story who is actually really worth talking about is Andy. Sorry, I'm laughing. His name's Glasscock. Andy Glasscock is a police officer, and I'm not laughing at you, Andy, I'm just laughing at your name. Andy was a police officer who spent most of the time that she was down there lying on his stomach with the microphone trying to communicate with baby Jessica. He was trying to send sound down there and seeing if he could get anything back. He could, and mainly, I mean, it's great. Mainly she was just crying for her mum, but at least, at that point they were like, well, we know she's alive. At least, if she's crying, that's a good thing. He then would do these kind of because he didn't want to move away from her, he just wanted to keep talking to her. So he'd then do these things. I think it's quite cute. He'd do what does the cat say? And she would make the noise back. And what does a cow say? All that kind of stuff. So yeah, so good on him. Good on him. He properly dedicated his time to doing that. So by the time Robert O'Donnell arrived, volunteers had dug a shaft parallel to the one that Jessica was in, barely wide enough really to hold a grown man. And it was 29 feet deep. Fuck. I mean, it was amazing. These were people who, they just gave their time. They just gave their energy. They gave their effort. So basically what the idea was to try and create a tunnel next to the one that she was in. So that there would be essentially 2 wells going down, and then what they would do at the bottom is they would create a sort of space down there, and they would pull her out through that. Because what's really strange is when she fell down, in my head straight away I was like, oh, she's fallen and she's lying at the bottom of a well. But it was weirder than that. She fell down and then she got sort of trapped in the side of it, off in a wee tunnel. So that was where it was getting really complicated. Obviously it's complicated to get her out of it anyway, but what made it more complicated is that it wasn't just a sheer drop down. It was a drop down with a fall to the side. So they had to, create this whole entire system of, let's drill another thing down and we can try and create another tunnel that doesn't exist to see if we can get it out. So Robert arrives and he's watching all of this happen. Robert then wouldn't leave that back garden for the next 24 hours. At noon on the 3rd day, the drills stopped, and Robert O'Donnell, with a mining cap on, the one with the light on it, strapped to his head, he was lowered by a harness down into the well. Now, it's a very small space, as I said. Robert was tall and he was thin. He was 6 feet tall and he was incredibly skinny. So, idea was that if anyone was going to fit down there, then it would be Robert. Robert didn't tell anyone at this point that he was claustrophobic. He just kept that to himself. So into the newly dug tunnel he went. He lay down on his back and he was lowered down, hands first, and down he went. He got into the cross tunnel, the one I was talking about, that they built between the well that she was in and the new one that they had built, and he saw baby Jessica. Before he'd gone down, Jessica's mother had said, we call her by a nickname, we call her Juicy. So he managed to get himself close to Jessica and he said, Juicy, I'm here to help you. Now her leg was trapped in a really strange position. He said it looked like almost someone doing the splits. Like her legs had opened wide, and he said to her, he was terrified to just sort of move her. So he said, can you move your leg? And at first she said no. And he tried to explain to her, you need, if we're going to get out of this, I'm going to need you to just move that leg. And he sort of gingerly picked it up, and she very reluctantly, but she willingly went with him, and she let him move that leg into a position where her legs weren't in a splits position, and and she was just in a safer position. So Robert was sure that she had no spinal injuries, but she was in the position that she was in. She was wedged in so tightly that he was really struggling to get her out. He had really no room to manoeuvre. There was a little bit of room, but there wasn't much. And he started to panic. He started to think, how, with this little room, am I going to be able to actually get her out of here? I don't know how I'm going to do it. So he resigned himself to the fact that actually what would have to happen is that the diggers would need to come back and they would have to widen. They would have to widen it in order for him to get back down and be able to actually get himself into a position where he could get her and he could get her back up. So they pulled the harness and they brought him back up. I mean, my God, you can imagine what is going on at this time. The hope in people that when someone goes down there, they're going to get her back, and he comes back up empty-handed. Being that close and having to come back up, devastating. However, Robert was determined he was going to make a second attempt at it, and a doctor stepped in at this point, had a chat with him, and then said, no, I don't think you should. I think you're too distraught. I think you're really affected by this. I think it's a very bad idea. Let's find someone else. Let's send someone else down that well. You're not mentally fit after your first attempt at saving her. I don't want you to go back down. But Robert was absolutely insistent that he was going to go back down and get her. So, in short, he did. He goes back down. This time, he takes with him KY jelly, and he starts pulling, and he starts moving her fraction by fraction, just small bit at a time. They lie there for hours together in this tunnel, just Robert and baby Jessica, as he just moves her an inch at a time. He just slowly gets her out of the bit that she's absolutely wedged into. And finally, he's able to send the message up that they're ready to come back up, because he's finally got her free. He says to her, you're out, Juicy. So a harness for her is lowered down, and Robert places her in it. Jessica was lifted up from the shaft. She reached the top, and she was immediately surrounded, of course, by her parents. and by everyone else who was there. So 1 minute after Robert was lifted up, and he took baby Jessica in his arms, and he fought through the crowds to get her away from all of the people who were surrounding her. 3.1 million people were watching this live on TV. 3.1 million. Fuck me. That is some number of people. Just to give you the scale of what was going on here, Ronald Reagan would later tell Jessica's parents that he was in Nancy Reagan's hotel room while this was on TV. Nancy had just been told that she had breast cancer and she had to go for a biopsy. Now, she refused to go for her biopsy because she said, I will not leave until I watch her come up from that well. Fuck, that's insane. Other stuff around the baby Jessica story is that actually the photo, so the moment I was just describing there, the moment where he has baby Jessica in his hands, a local photographer who was, just an amateur photographer, he took the photograph of Robert with baby Jessica in his hands, and he went on to win the Pulitzer Prize that year for that photograph, which I will put up and you can see it. Every major network interrupted the regular programming to cover the moment. The headline was, Jessica McClure is up. She's alive. What a fighter. It's a miracle. Now, Jessica was pretty badly injured. Her feet were damaged. She ended up having to have a toe removed. She had head wounds. She was dehydrated. And she needed a little bit of surgery on her shoulder. But she was alive. So Jessica went to hospital and her medical fees were covered by an anonymous donor. The fees were $50,000. Wow, oh wow. So what came next? There was a parade in honour of Robert. There were television appearances. There was a letter from the president. A handshake from the vice president. There was an appearance on Oprah. Bloody Oprah. He was on Oprah. Can't believe it. Robert's home telephone, it just rang day and night. TV shows everywhere, radio shows, they were all trying to get him on. He was so well known. He was a hero. He was an absolute hero. But eventually the cameras went away. The world's attention moved on and he was left alone. Some people will say it was fame that killed Robert O'Donnell. When he killed himself, he left 3 notes. 2 to his sons and 1 addressed to no one that simply said, no help from nobody but family. He was 37 when he shot himself. Fuck. 37. So why did he kill himself? Well, the fame. The press. It was too much. It was too much. That was such a big event. That was so huge. The effect of that on his life was on a scale that, yeah, you or I can't even imagine the scale that was on. Everybody was affected by this. Jessica's parents were massively affected. They had to leave their house. They had to move elsewhere because the press attention was crazy. They ended up, this is terrible, they ended up becoming alcoholics. They ended up in marriage counselling. And it was all because the spotlight on them was just too bright. Even years later, the obsession with the story of the baby girl who fell in the well was too much. Now, Robert wasn't the only person involved, of course, in the rescue, but he did become the focus. His mum said it was the greatest moment of Robert's life, and it was the worst thing that ever happened to him. His brother said, and I find this really interesting, I think if he could have had to do it all over again, he would have stayed at home and he would have let somebody else help that kid. Yeah, interesting. And what did happen for Robert? Well, basically, I mean, the whole story, unfortunately, it becomes about money. So what happens is lots of TV companies and movie companies become interested in making a movie of the story of the rescue of Jessica McClure. So they want to tell this story. So Robert, he's interested at this point. He's thinking, yeah, okay, fine. I would like to tell my side of the story. I'd like a share in, in the success that's going to be the movie of telling this story. Now, two very sort of distinct groups break up at this point. Robert's part of one of them, and they say they're the people who really dealt with the situation. And the other group say, well, yeah, we also dealt with it. That's like other firefighters and other paramedics who were there, but weren't necessarily the ones, really close to the action. So there's these kind of weird, like, two group thing going on. Robert said, I hate to see the split in the rescuers like this, but our story is the real story. We were the major players, and I want the best movie. I want a movie that I can show my grandkids. So it becomes a massive, massive battle. It goes down like a legal road. Oh, for fuck's sake! It just gets stupid. I don't even know. Actually, do you know what? Don't even know if that movie ever got made. Not sure. I know there's been a couple of like shitty sort of TV movies about it, but I don't know if the movie deal that this fight was about ever got made. Not sure. For Jessica, things got even crazier. She became a name known around the world. During her stay in the hospital, she received 50 calls an hour. The Walt Disney Company, they sent a 5-foot tall Winnie the Pooh to see her in hospital and invited her to Disneyland. She received a puppy. Yes, a wee dog. She named that Shirley. She was invited, get this, she was invited to the Vatican for an audience with the Pope. I mean, it's insane. Money poured into a trust fund established for Jessica, and it was estimated that was nearing $700,000. I think I read recently, actually, that she has cashed that out, and I think it was I think she has walked away from this with about 1.5 million from the money that people have given. Andy Glasscock, Andy, the guy with, do you remember Andy? He was the guy with the microphone who was speaking to her when she was down in the well. What does the cat say? All that stuff. He ended up being in the Michael Jackson video for Man in the Mirror. I mean, it's so huge. Robert was asked to speak at so many firefighter conventions. He became this symbol. He became this kind of hope, this thing that firefighters could aspire to be, this hero, this rescuer. But attitudes towards Robert started to change, and his co-workers began to call him Robo-Donald. As in Robocock. Robocop. Robocock? What am I talking about? They were tired. Did I say Robocock? They were tired of hearing about the rescue. And, I get this, they were annoyed that the world had kind of given this moment to him. There were lots of other people involved in that moment, and it felt like Robert was just being given that moment. And it felt like a little bit, I think, to other people, like he was trying to turn his moment of fame into something grander. it's said that he would like introduce himself to people and he would wait for them to recognise him. And if they didn't, sometimes they did, but other times if they didn't, he would say to them, "Oh, you might recognise my name because," and then he would tell them the story of rescuing Jessica. His boss at the time said this: "There were hundreds of men and women at that rescue, and a handful of them, they lost their way. One never found it again. In today's wired, cabled, satellite-linked world, with countless television stations and grand plans for countless more, there will be limitless guests like Robert O'Donnell. More news programmes making more regular Joes into heroes. Thousands of people seeking the camera. Some people will take it for the ephemera that it is, and eventually go back to their lives. Others, like Robert O'Donnell, will try, but will fail." So when Robert O'Donnell put a gun to his head, that was him accepting that he was just another rescuer, and that there would be more to come, braver and better than him. And so ends the story of Robert O'Donnell and baby Jessica. Wow. Do you know what I think fascinates me about this is, yes, he is an extraordinary person, because actually what he did is extraordinary. It really is. I mean, she's an extraordinary person as well because she survived that. But I guess that's what's interesting is, whose story is it? Whose story is that? I'm not quite sure. Because one kind of overshadows the other. Oh, so much trauma for both of those involved. But, take all that shit aside. Take the fact that he maybe chased a bit of fame. Take the fact that he maybe got a bit lost in the whole situation. Actually, what he did was actually pretty extraordinary, and hats off to the man for going down into that well and saving that baby. Okay, the second story. I'm going to tell you this one. This came to me actually from a very special person, but she doesn't want to be named, so she shall be she who shall not be named. Thank you for this story. A tsunami caused by the massive 9.9 magnitude earthquake hit the Daiichi nuclear plant in Fukushima, and the meltdown was hazardous. The radiation exposure forced hundreds and thousands of people to evacuate from their homes and the lives that they had led. Among those who fled, there were a few that came back, and they came back to make a difference for the younger generation. A group of more than 200 Japanese pensioners volunteered to tackle the nuclear crisis at the Fukushima power station. And this was led by one man. Who was this man? Yasutaro Yamada. Mr. Yamada. So, there he is. He is at home. He is watching the images on the news. He's seeing what's happening. And he decides it's time for his generation to stand up, to do something. So he decided no longer did he want to just be an observer of the struggle that was happening in Fukushima, where people were fleeing their homes and people's lives were devastated. So he's a retired engineer, and at the age of 72, he organised a team of pensioners to go with him to where the disaster had happened. What a hero this man is. He formed the Skilled Veteran Corps. Now, it was made up of retired engineers and lots of other professionals. Everybody was over the age of 60 in that group. The belief is, Mr. Yamada's belief, is that they should actually be facing the danger of radiation and not young people. It's a pretty bold thing to think. It's a pretty amazing way to look at life. To say, actually, no. I'm in my 60s, I'm in my 70s, might be my 80s, whatever. But actually, it's better for me to face radiation than it is for a young person to face that. So for weeks, Mr. Yamada, he got back in touch with all of his old friends. He was sending out emails. He got himself a Twitter account. He got himself a Facebook. I mean, social media, not just a young person's game, So, good on you, Mr. Yamada, setting up a Twitter account in your 70s. Good on you. I mean, I say that right. I just, some social media, I'm totally lost on, what is it? Snapchat? Don't get it. Can't do it. Can't do the Snapchat. I don't understand it. Don't know how it works. Anyway. So when he's asked about it, he says, volunteering to take the place of younger workers at the power station, it isn't brave. It's just logical. I'm 72, and on average, I probably have 13 to 15 years left to live. If I were exposed to radiation, it would take 20 to 30 years to really get to me. Therefore, us older ones will be fine. I just love the idea that these pensioners got together and thought, yeah, we've lived our life. And actually, if this radiation is going to cause any illness, let it be us. Let it not be the young. So Mr. Yamada, he gained huge support. He ended up in talks with the government about this. The Japanese government loved this idea. They thought this was a brilliant idea. They were like, people could not express enough gratitude for what he was actually trying to do. So he began loads of conversations about increasing the Japanese pensioners' workforce. So the plant, it was still spewing out radiation, and nearly 3 months after the earthquake and the tsunami, Japan had to raise the radiation level to the highest that it has ever been. But Mr. Yamada and his team of pensioners, they went in and they took over the jobs of the young people who used to work there. So Mr. Yamada says, and I absolutely love this, he says, I don't think I'm particularly special. Most Japanese people have this feeling in their heart. The question is whether you step forward or you stay behind and you watch. And I really hope to be as active and feel as passionate when I'm as old as Mr. Yamada. I don't know what it's like in other countries, but I know that in the UK, the way that pensioners are treated is just awful. I hate it so much. It's just this idea that, you're old, you're useless, which is absolutely not the truth. It is, it's so frustrating. I find it so annoying. Anyway, yeah, so that ends it's a very short story, but yeah, I think it's really uplifting because I think, Mr. Yamada, good on you. Good on you. Okay. Right, I hope you enjoyed this little trip into the stories of people, into the stories of real people. And as I said at the beginning, I love them. Okay? So, get in touch. The Facebook group is really going off at the moment. I really love it. There's so much chat going on it all the time. Get involved. There's lots of silly stuff happening there. There's lots of serious stuff happening. There's lots of fun, lots of chat. It's really nice. It's really, really active. So, yeah. Extraordinary Stories Podcast. Get involved in the group. You can get me Twitter, Instagram. You can find me there. Now, I'd normally end by saying, if you know a great story, an extraordinary story, blah, 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 You know how it goes. But what I want is I want your story. Tell me your story, because I want to know. Tell me the story of someone that you know, if you don't want to tell me about you. Tell me a story about someone you've heard of who's done something amazing, who's lived a life, who's been an amazing person. I'm one of those annoying people in a pub, right? So this is like something I'll do quite a lot. I sit down in a pub with people and I go, oh, so what's your story? And people always go, I don't have a story. I've just my life's been really boring. Nobody's life's been boring. Nobody's life's been boring. There's always I will always find what's interesting to tell. I will always find that. So just tell me your story. If you want to, share it with me. You can email me. You can, send me a Facebook message and we'll set up a bit of a conversation. I just really want to know about you. I just want to know about people. That's what really, really deep down fascinates me. Okay? So, even if you don't think it's interesting, I swear to God, I will find it interesting. Okay, I've rattled on enough. Thanks so much for listening to Extraordinary Stories podcast. Okay? Goodbye.
It didn't affect me really one way or the other. I would imagine from the look on his face, let's get it on, let's do it, let's get it over.